Good morning, everyone. I want to start out by thanking everyone involved with SciViz for having me here today to talk about my project Corpus Interius, which is a fine art project that I've been working on that focuses on the human microbiome. And this is an image of the final result. But to start out, I'd like to discuss a little bit of the process that led to this project, which actually began with the marine microbiome and is an interesting transition from our last talk. I found myself, while I was studying geology, fascinated with diatoms and radiolurans and how they were used to date rock strata. But when we look at the rock strata, we often don't see the microbes that actually compose these ancient rocks. So I set out to find a way to visualize all the microbes that over time settled out of the water and were preserved, or in some cases dissolved. So as an artist, I tend to start with pen and ink drawings and create these complex drawings that serve as scripts for later work. I devised a plan to reconstruct these microbes using a hand lens that a geologist might use to study a rock formation, and make these structures into strata. And each one I learn like a text. And so this is a piece that's about 16 by 20 inches. And what I want the viewer to get from these is an idea of what we see and what we can't see. So when you're standing back looking at this piece, you tend to see the strata. You don't see all the details, but as the viewer, you're forced to get closer to it. Everyone is handed a hand lens when they see this in public, and they're invited to get close and see the microcompositions that exist within the macro structures. And I want to instill in the viewer a sense of discovery, that they can take on the role of the researcher that they might not have the chance to do in their everyday life, and start to ask the questions that a researcher might ask. So what are these organisms? Where are they from? How did they get there? And what role do they have in understanding our environment? Towards the end of this project, I found myself wanting to find a way to apply this to the human body and see how I could take this idea of researching and understanding something through these microcompositions. And at the same time, I was going through a flare-up of Crohn's disease, a disease that, if you're not familiar with, is an autoimmune condition that affects your digestive system. And it comes with many different symptoms, but they're often related to the gastrointestinal tract, which, if any of you have had gastrointestinal problems, it's not something you tend to want to share with anyone. And I don't know many people that would, be able to talk about it freely. But because there's such a stigma around talking about these things, I started to think, why do we view it that way? And what research is going on? And actually, finding out that this is actually a very complex, interesting, and dynamic system that we often don't notice, yet it's going on every day within us. And having looked at the microbiome in the marine setting, I became very fascinated with this dynamic ecosystem that's within us. And though it's not directly related to Crohn's, it's one of the many different pathways that's being looked into as to find a possible cause for the disease. So I decided to look at the interior of the colon using open source medical imagery and use these microbes to create traces of the interior of the bowel. And by subtracting the human element, it makes this abstract where I've kind of set parameters and controls like a scientist might in their own work, and remove the person from it. So you can enter it as an abstract and learn from the piece, and you can see the details on it. Again, I still use a hand lens to get very close, and this is the entire piece is about 20 inches by 20 inches. So you can see the very fine detail. It takes me several months to do each piece. So I want to invite people, again, to get close to it, come into it with abstraction and then come out of it and realize that they've seen something from a completely different perspective, that they've found some wonder and curiosity in something that they never would have noticed before. And so this is a zoom in of the one section. And I also started to work on panels. So this is another image of a colon. And I've continued the bacteria around the sides of it. Bacteria themselves are also another thing that frequently are considered something that cause disease, but we don't realize that our body actually needs these to survive. And these are several 4-inch by 4-inch panels that I've created a series. And then I've also extended them into this system of cultures and making these abstract communities of bacteria. And one of the other things I've attempted to do with some of these cultures is like a scientist might apply a stain to understand what bacteria is there or the structures. I've applied digitally colors to some of these pieces to highlight the bacteria and then also the connections that are made between them. So you can see more in this one. I've allowed the white to be enhanced by the fact that the computer has selectively left that blank, and I use that to represent things like biofilms and these connections and pathways between the different bacteria. And so while I was going through this, I also decided to start reaching out to those who are actually studying the microbiome and understand their process. So for the original pieces, I subtracted the human element also because in many of the research processes, DNA is made sure to only be from bacteria, and the humanness within the research is subtracted from it as well. So the one element that I found crucially important to my work is making sure to always speak to professionals who are doing this type of work and understand their process, and how can we communicate their process through art so that the audience can understand it as well. And in this piece, I've now added back several of the human elements to it. So I've abstractly represented several of the different layers of the colon. And you can actually, and then this is a cross-section looking through at the bacteria inside. Okay, and this is my final piece. So this is where I've left this work by adding back the human elements.